Before we get into the sells this week, definitely want to recap who we had as a sell high candidate last week. Last week, we talked about selling Chuba Hubbard. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with Jonathan Brooks coming back in, this being a bad offense. Once Brooks is in here, I don't think really any running back in Carolina is going to be an exciting start with this being a running back by committee. Zay Flowers was a clear sell-high candidate coming off of 2 very strong weeks where we had seen the target volume be very up and down all season for Flowers. I think it's probably going to be much tougher to sell him now, obviously after the disappointing game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But ultimately, I still think that he's very similar to the player that we thought he was last week, right? I mean, this is going to be a flex play, not necessarily a locked and loaded top 24 wide receiver for you every single week. But instead, if you have a good matchup, he does have the upside to go out there and get you 20 fantasy points. So it's going to be a week-to-week consideration on if you're putting him in your flex spot. David Montgomery was a clear sell high candidate coming off a game where obviously the Lions just put a beating down on the Dallas Cowboys. Not saying that Montgomery's a bad running back, not saying that he wasn't going to be great in fantasy, just identifying, hell, he's been a top 5 running back so far this season. People are telling me they would rather have him over Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, and in a full PPR format, the receiving usage isn't going to be there. We know Jahmyr Gibbs has both the receiving role as well as some goal line usage. So in terms of where the high value touches are coming for Montgomery, it just can't really compare to what you're getting with those other top end RB1s, such as Bijan, Breece Hall, etc., etc. So Montgomery was that sell-high candidate, honestly. Now dealing with the knee injury, coming off the disappointing game this past week, probably much tougher to sell Montgomery for that top-end RB. Sam Laporta was a sell-high candidate coming off the game where he had the long receiving touchdown against the Dallas Cowboys, but just looking at the underlying usage where the target volume is so much lower than what it was a year ago. Honestly, after this past week, probably going to be impossible to sell Laporta. Like, I have Laporta in the Flock League. I tried my best to sell him last week. Nobody was interested in buying. And where I'm at this week is I'm in a situation where I probably have to bench the dude. I have Cole Kmet down there on the bench. Kmet coming off the bye week. I probably play Kmet against Washington and move Laporta down. Now, obviously, with that being said, I want to be on record. I don't think that Laporta is someone you can cut at this point. It's still a very good Lions offense. And right now, sportsbooks are actually projecting the Lions to be the number 1 scoring team in the NFL for this week in particular. And then Jameson Williams as our next sell-high candidate. It was a very clear spot where Jameson had been coming off a few weeks where he's been consistently seeing that long receiving touchdown. But if you had looked at the underlying volume where he was consistently also seeing 3 to 4 targets per game, really the usage did not predict going into the future that this would be someone that you can confidently start. Now, obviously, Jameson had the dud last week. Jameson Williams is now dealing with a suspension, so it's probably a little bit too late to sell Jameson if you didn't throw him on the block a week ago. Wan'Dale Robinson was a clear sell-high candidate with Malik Neighbors coming back in, understanding that this offense was so bad that there's no way that they're going to be able to support 2 viable wide receivers in fantasy. And honestly, at this point, I don't really see in the live streams anymore people going out there and finding nice returns for Wan'Dale. So if you have him, you probably keep him. He's not bad enough to cut. Tyrone Tracy was a sell-high candidate for us last week. And honestly, I was wrong with this. I thought that what we were going to see is Devin Singletary coming in and Singletary splitting this backfield with Tracy, but Singletary having 50% of the snaps. It didn't really matter. No, Tracy does see the majority of snaps here in New York. But I do want to reiterate, very similar to what we were talking about with Chuba Hubbard once Jonathan Brooks is in this offense. This Giants team is just so bad that you really can't rely upon a committee running back in this offense. Whereas if you're going to go ahead and if you're going to look at like the Detroit Lions, yeah, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs can be in a committee and they can both be great in fantasy. But the reason being is the Lions have one of the best offenses in the NFL. They have the best offensive line in the NFL. They're going to run the ball over and over and over again. You're just simply not going to see that here in New York. But honestly, probably a spot where you're not wanting to sell Tracy at this point. And then our last sell-high candidates were Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs, under the assumption that Anthony Richardson coming in was going to be really taking away all upside that you had in the passing attack in particular here in Indianapolis. Now, obviously, with that being said, you still do have the possibility of this Colts offense being decent, but if it is, Anthony Richardson's going to have a lot of rushing yards, rushing touchdowns to make up for the lack of passing volume. So that doesn't help Pittman at all. That doesn't help Downs at all. But honestly, after this past week, I think that most people are probably going to be in agreement with that, and it probably will be a very, very tough spot to sell either player. So yeah, let's go over to the guys that I think we should actually be looking to move on from this week. Our first running back will be Jordan Mason. Now here, looking at Jordan Mason, this is the first time that he has ever appeared on a sell high video for us. And I want to be on record as well. Jordan Mason is still a must-start running back every single week that you have no Christian McCaffrey. While McCaffrey was back at practice, kind of, last week, in reality, there's no way in hell McCaffrey's going to be coming back this week. You actually have the Niners that are going to be on bye in week 9. The worry is that McCaffrey comes back in week 10 this season. And if that does happen, while Jordan Mason could potentially still see the field in some capacity, just realistically speaking, there's no way in hell you're ever starting Jordan Mason. He goes down to just being a premium handcuff running back, somebody like Braylon Allen that you would never start with a healthy running back in front of him. But if the guy were to get injured, then all of a sudden he is viable. Now, with that being said, I do want to give the positives of Jordan Mason. Obviously, he played a career high 86% of the snaps this past week against the Kansas City Chiefs. You still have the opportunities. You have 14 carries in this backfield. And while I think that there is a shot that Christian McCaffrey comes back in week 10, it is far, far, far from a guarantee. And honestly, if everybody else in your league thinks, no, McCaffrey's coming back, then you have no business selling Jordan Mason. If everybody's going to be pricing Jordan Mason as if he only has a couple weeks left until he expires, then at that point you hold him on your roster and you hope that you have more games with no McCaffrey going forward. But what I've seen a lot in the live streams, where obviously we're streaming every single night, answering as many questions as we possibly can, is I've seen a lot of people coming out and telling me, no, Mason, McCaffrey's not coming back this season. There's a 0% chance McCaffrey comes back. And if I could approach one of those owners and sell Jordan Mason as an RB1, I think that is where you can make some money here. I'm going through and looking at my rest of season rankings over on the site. We have Jordan Mason directly behind J.K. Dobbins, Chase Brown, as well as Kareem Hunt. And using the site's trade finder, we can actually see that Jordan Mason and Travis Etienne were traded for Aaron Jones. I actually really like this deal in that, honestly, Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones will probably be very close in my rankings this week. And you can make a strong argument for Jordan Mason over Aaron Jones. So it seems kind of crazy that you're adding Travis Etienne to this. But if you think about the possibility of McCaffrey coming back after the bye week, and all of a sudden you maybe only get one startable game from Jordan Mason, in the long run, this trade effectively turns into you sending Travis Etienne for Aaron Jones, which would be an absolute no-brainer. The next deal, somebody was able to throw together a bunch of little small pieces to get to Alvin Kamara. Somebody traded Jordan Mason, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Nick Chubb to get to Kamara. Absolute no-brainer. The one afterwards, somebody traded Jordan Mason and Romeo Doubs to get to J.K. Dobbins. I would do this. Now, of course, I want to make sure that you understand this isn't a guaranteed win by any means. Like, there is a world where McCaffrey doesn't come back and all of a sudden Mason is ahead of J.K. Dobbins in our rankings every single week going into the future. But with the expectation that McCaffrey could possibly be coming back in week 10, I think you're offloading a lot of risk. And then somebody sold Jordan Mason for Brian Thomas Jr. as well, which is just an absolute no-brainer. I mean, the expectations for Thomas should be sky high going into the future. Actually, one of my favorite underdog picks this week will be in that Packers and Jacksonville game, where you can go Brian Thomas higher than 60.5 receiving yards or Jaden Reed higher than 54.5 receiving yards. I think those are both very interesting. And of course, if you wanted to lose on those with me, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description or the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you are actually going to be getting a free Matthew Stafford pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Thursday night game. And on top of that, you're going to get a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. So make sure you take advantage of that with the link in the description comment section and use code FLOCK. Now moving over to our next sell high candidate. This is going to be a pair of teammates here. We are going to be looking at both the combo of George Pickens and Najee Harris. Now, obviously, George Pickens absolutely blows up with Russell Wilson under center. And this shouldn't be that much of a surprise. I mean, I do want to say it's a surprise that this team looked this good with Russ, but the expectation from the transition to Justin Fields to Russell Wilson is that, yeah, there's going to be more passing volume in this offense. Now, maybe that's not a great thing where you don't have as many rushing yards, you don't have as many rushing touchdowns, blah, 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 but the passing volume will be better for Pickens. Now, of course, going into the future, are we expecting us to see 37 points scored in every Steelers game? I would say no to that. I mean, if we take a step backwards and remember what Russell Wilson has been, Russell Wilson has been one of the least efficient quarterbacks that we have seen in the NFL over the past 3 seasons. Now, of course, I want to acknowledge the fact that if you are looking at Russ's transition over to Pittsburgh, this probably is a much better situation than what you actually had in Denver. But this is simply a 1-game sample of Russell Wilson looking great in a primetime game where I don't necessarily view George Pickens as that must-start wide receiver 2 every single week. I still view him as that week-to-week flex play. I have him ranked in the same range as Olave, Terry, and Flowers. Obviously, I would trade Pickens for Terry or Olave ASAP because obviously long-term those quarterbacks are going to go back to Washington and New Orleans and make those receivers way better than where they're currently ranked. But I mean, going through and looking at some of these George Pickens trades, somebody traded George Pickens for J.K. Dobbins. Give me Dobbins. Somebody traded Pickens and Andrews to Josh Jacobs. Give me Andrews. Somebody traded Pickens for Brian Robinson. Give me Robinson. Somebody traded Pickens and Gibbs for Montgomery and Lamb. I know maybe this seems weird with us putting Montgomery as a sell-high candidate last week, but his price point was a lot higher than this. Where, I mean, if I'm looking at this, Gibbs to Montgomery, yes, is a definite downgrade in a full PPR format. But the upgrade that you get from Pickens to Lamb is so much higher with the expected points per game going into the future. So I think selling Pickens does make a lot of sense, as well as selling Najee Harris. Now, obviously, Najee Harris looked phenomenal this past week. You get the 102 rushing yards, you get the rushing touchdown. Now, going into the future, if we're going to be realistic with this workload with Najee Harris doesn't look as good as it did previously. The reason being is since you've had Jaylen Warren come back into this offense, the amount of snaps have dramatically come down for Najee, as well as the receiving usage. If you look over the past 2 weeks here, you've actually seen Najee Harris fall to under 50% of the snaps in this Steelers offense. And that was opposed to 59, 69, and 74% of the snaps in the games where you had no Jaylen Warren. And also the receiving usage has fallen off tremendously. Over the past 2 weeks, Najee Harris has only had a total of 3 targets. Whereas if you look at the 3 weeks prior, Najee Harris was up at 13 targets. So the receiving usage has plummeted. These snaps have gone down. Now, obviously, in a game where they just absolutely boat race the Jets, Najee Harris is going to run the ball over and over and over again, going to look damn good while doing so. But reiterating what we were talking about previously, I don't think you're going to get the 37 points scored every single week for the Steelers going into the future. I'm looking at where I have Najee ranked rest of season. I have him ranked right behind guys like Kareem Hunt, Jordan Mason, and Nick Chubb. Using the trade finder on the site, obviously the trade finder is completely free for you. If you're ever thinking about making a trade, say you want to trade either away Najee Harris or you want to trade for Najee Harris, just go to the trade finder on flockfantasy.com, put that player into one of the options. You could pick your league settings as well. And then you can see all real trades that have been made in real fantasy football leagues with the player that you are searching for. And also you have a trade calculator you can use on the site for free as well, where if you use the trade calculator, you can also put in your exact league settings to help you out. The site is flockfantasy.com. I'm sure you already know. But anyway, DJ Moore, Najee Harris for Bijan Robinson. Give me Bijan by a mile. I don't even know if Najee is a consistent starter for my team going into the future, where Bijan Robinson is a top 10 RB. Somebody traded Najee, Ladd, Worthy for Lamb, no brainer. Somebody traded Pittman and Najee for CMC and Jordan Mason. In my mind, Pittman has almost no value at all at this point. So if you're telling me that I'm able to go through and I'm able to get the Niners running backs for Najee Harris, no brainer. Somebody traded Najee and Frymuth for Brian Thomas and Colby Parkinson. I love this trade as an example because what's really funny here is this is the most disguised 1-for-1 swap I've ever seen. Pat Frymuth is not that much better than you just going through and streaming tight ends off the waiver wire. Whereas if you're pivoting from Najee Harris to Brian Thomas, you're just getting a massive upgrade. Now, our next sell high candidate, I really hope I'm wrong about. I would love, and I mean love, for Tank Bigsby to take over and absolutely dominate in the second half of the season. Bigsby was my 3rd most drafted running back in underdog drafts this year. Took him in round 18 every chance that I had. And hell, we're going to win a lot of money if Bigsby keeps doing what he has. I mean, you've had 2 weeks now with over 20 fantasy points for Tank Bigsby. Obviously, this past week, Travis Etienne not playing, Bigsby dominates, looks so good. If you were watching the London game, I mean, they're going out there, they're running every single play against the New England Patriots. It is a run, 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 run. You had over 15 rushing attempts straight at one point. Bigsby was incredible, 26 carries. And honestly, going into the future, I probably would rather have Bigsby over Travis Etienne. Etienne's been really bad. I mean, if you are looking at Etienne, the only saving grace is he has the receiving usage. But if I'm thinking about Tank Bigsby going into the future, let's realistically profile this running back. This is a running back that at best, we don't see Etienne come back for a while. At best, Etienne gets dealt. So at best, Tank Bigsby is in a two-man running back by committee with Dearness Johnson, who's actually seeing the receiving usage. Even in the game with no Etienne, even in the game prior where Etienne was benched, you are looking at a total of 1 reception all season for Tank Bigsby. Yes, the man has had 1 reception. His 1 target this past week, he dropped. He's not a receiving back. He's not going to turn into a receiving back, which is completely fine if you're Jordan Mason, right? I mean, we were talking about Jordan Mason coming into the season saying that he wasn't a receiving back. Now, of course, you in the comment section decided to scream at me, oh my God, he worked on it all year. He worked on it. And then what we've seen so far from Jordan Mason this season is a total of 0 games with more than 2 receptions. But yeah, same thing here with Bigsby. You're not going to have the receiving usage. With Jordan Mason, it doesn't matter because Jordan Mason's in one of the best offenses in the league. But are you expecting that Jacksonville is going to be in one of the best offenses in the NFL? I'm not. I think Jacksonville is a below average offense. If you don't have the receiving usage, you are touchdown dependent. Now, obviously, if you score 2 touchdowns in a game, you're going over 20 fantasy points and you look great. But projecting that out going into the future is almost impossible to do. In my mind, Bigsby is going to be a touchdown or bust running back in a bad offense. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is Travis Etienne comes back in and Travis Etienne turns this into a 3-man running back by committee, or maybe even Etienne takes back the backfield. So if I could move off Bigsby for like Rachaad White, Javonte Williams, Rico Dowdle, if I could sell Bigsby for Dowdle, it'd be a no-brainer. Or Jonathan Brooks, I would. Looking at some recent trades that were made with the trade finder, somebody traded Tank Bigsby for Jalen Waddle. Somebody traded Bigsby, Singletary for Pitts and Javonte. Somebody traded the Bigsby, Baker, Neighbors for Mixon and Jalen Hurts. Now, this one's interesting to point out because if you break this down, it's like, could you trade Baker Mayfield and Tank Bigsby for Jalen Hurts? If so, I would love to do that. If you can sell Baker for anything post Evans and Godwin trades, I would. And then Neighbors to Mixon's kind of a lateral move and up to you based off their offenses. And then obviously Tank Bigsby for Rico Dowdle. Love to see that trade because that's the number one thing I'd be looking to do if I had Bigsby. Now, our last sell high player will be Tony Pollard. So I thought Tony Pollard was a must-start running back this past week. Yes, they were going up against Buffalo. Yes, we were told that the Titans offense would be an absolute dumpster fire, where if you were looking at what you had from NFL Sportsbooks, they were putting out the lowest implied team total in the NFL for the Tennessee Titans. They were supposed to be absolutely garbage. They were garbage. I still thought that Pollard was going to be a must-start back simply because you had no Tajee Spears. So in any games with no Spears, Pollard's going to go out there and he's going to have the usage. That's exactly what you had. You had a total of 22 opportunities for Tony Pollard. 22 opportunities. Now, with that being said, going into the future, this is still a garbage offense. With those 22 opportunities, it gives you 8.5 points. And I would be fine. I would almost even call Tony Pollard a buy low candidate if it wasn't for the fact that it's not like Spears is going to be missing the rest of the season. Spears is going to be coming back soon. Spears isn't on the IR. So if Tajee Spears comes back in, obviously Pollard's still the starting running back, but if Spears sees 30% of the opportunities and this Titans offense continues to be a bottom 3 offense in the NFL, I think it's a clear sell high spot on Pollard. I still have ranked as a top 24 running back, right? He's getting volume in the receiving usage, but I would pivot off to like DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, or James Conner if I could. Some recent trades with Pollard. Somebody traded Adams and Pollard for Breece Hall. Somebody traded Pollard and Chase Brown for Devon Achane. Somebody traded Pollard for Brian Thomas. I would love to make any of those deals. But I really hope I was able to help you out. Of course, if you wanted to tail me over there on Underdog Fantasy with either Brian Thomas to have more than 60 receiving yards or Jaden Reed to have more than 54, you can find that link in the description and comment section. I do need to warn you, I'm currently 1 for about 324 on Underdog so far this year, but we're due. And if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Matthew Stafford pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game on Thursday. And you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. Just make sure that you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog. That way I know who to hook up with that free team review voucher. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you and really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.